Well, hello everyone. This is Adrian, and I'll be your co-host today, along with Sheta. I'm from Panama. He's from Serbia, and we're both students in Microverse. Microverse is a school for remote software developers that is completely free until you get a job. We have courses in the program ranging from data structures, algorithms, to Ruby, Ruby on Rails, JavaScript, React, Redux, HTML, and CSS. We take the program on a full-time basis for a minimum of 40 hours a week. We each have remote coding partners with whom we learn by pair programming, doing projects, and the entire length of the curriculum. We all help and support each other throughout the whole program until we get a job. It's truly an enriching, motivating, and community-led experience. The time and the growth that we've had so far throughout these last 5 weeks in the Microverse program have been phenomenal, both in soft skills and hard skills. Every couple of weeks, we organize these lunch and learns with guests such as Tanner Linsley, who will be shortly introduced by Sheta. Our goal here is to inspire others by sharing different perspectives from professional software developers with industry experience in remote work, freelancing, open source software, and cool companies like Nozzle. So, Sheta, go ahead. Please introduce our guest.
Thank you, Adrian. So today we have Tanner Linsley. He is a co-founder and vice president of user experience at Nozzle. He says about himself that he is obsessive and passionate about JavaScript, user interface, user experience, data visualization, and much more. He's also a core contributor for Chart.js. Tanner, first of all, thanks a lot for taking the time to do this lunch and learn. It means a lot to all of us here. I'm going to turn the lunch and learn over to you in just a second, but first I want to remind the students that they can ask questions using the Q&A section in the webinar tool, and we will get to as many as we can after the talk. Okay, Tanner, your turn now.
Okay. You were breaking up there for a little bit, so if I'm skipping a beat or anything like that, you let me know. Yeah, it's good to be here. I didn't know about Microverse until I met you guys, and man, it's really cool. Microverse is it's really impressive, like what it's able to do, being everything remote and everything kind of not disconnected, but just I don't know. I just really like the spirit that Microverse has, teaching people how to code, and especially like when I learned that you guys don't charge anybody until they get a job. That's pretty amazing. I wish I had tools like Microverse when I was learning how to code. But I'll give you a quick backstory about me really quick. I wanted to focus this little quick monologue here about on open source software and how it's affected my life personally. When I was in high school, I studied some HTML and CSS in one of my design classes, and that was about the extent of my programming skill. And it was very shallow. This was back before CSS3. It was very rudimentary. JavaScript was not even really a big thing yet. And before I went to college, I had a little bit of experience working with something called Joomla. And Joomla was a CMS that was similar to WordPress, but it's a little more old school. It was fun, but I didn't think anything of it. Later on, I got really into video production, video editing, music production, did that for a little while. And then I actually ended up taking 2 years off, and I went and served a mission for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints in Brazil for 2 years. I learned Portuguese. I didn't have any technology for 2 years. I was able to email my family every week and it was very focused on, just spreading Christianity and stuff. And so I had some time to think about what I wanted to do with my career while I was there. And when I got back and kind of got back into my life and society and everything, I started going back to school, studying film and studying audio engineering. And those things are very fun, and I love those things. But it quickly became apparent to me that I was not going to be able to make a very good living doing those things. And though they were fun, I kind of started to regard them more as like a hobby. and I started, I needed to make some money, you know, and I needed to make more money than I was just doing like sales at the local store, the mall, or I even worked for like an Apple retailer for a little bit. But it just really wasn't cutting it for me. I wanted something more creative. I learned about WordPress, and many of you might have gotten your introduction into programming from WordPress maybe. I liked WordPress because it helped me build websites for clients. I could, you know, do some freelance work here and there. And WordPress was open source, which just at the time boggled my mind, honestly. I was like, wow, this tool is free. I can use it to make money and build sites for people. Like, it just really blew my mind. And I took a leap of faith and I quit my job to work on WordPress sites full time. And did that for quite a while when I met my wife and got married about 6 years ago. And after I felt like I had gotten really into WordPress, I really wanted to pick up programming more as like a primary skill. And I had no idea where to go from here. Like programming to me was something that was really difficult to understand. It was going to be complex. But really what I did was I wanted to build an application. I grew up, you know, during high school is when the iPhone came out. And so building apps is like, it's like a dream that's ingrained in my blood, you know. I really wanted to build an app, even if it was something dumb. So I came up with a fun little use case as like a mapping app for off-road trails here where I live in Utah. And I wanted the best way to do that, and I found out that there was something called Ionic and Angular that I could use. I had no idea really how these things worked. Somebody told me that JavaScript was a good language to learn, but I really didn't care about JavaScript too much at the time. I just wanted to learn Ionic and Angular. And this was quite a while ago. This was 5 years ago. So I learned Ionic, which incidentally was also open source. And then I kind of went backwards. First I learned how to use Ionic, and then I learned about Angular and how Angular worked, you know, with Ionic. And then after that, I was like, oh, like this is actually just JavaScript. So I kind of like learned it backwards a little bit. I guess you could say I was an Angular developer before JavaScript. And after I realized kind of what I had started getting into, honestly, I went to Code Academy and just took every single JavaScript course I could find that was free. And I just pumped through them as fast as I could. And I just wanted to learn so much about it. And I even went to school. And while I was going to school, I was not studying web development, or I wasn't studying software development at all. I was still studying audio engineering. And I quickly changed that to study web development and software engineering. And I was talking to one of the heads of my department one day. And you know, I said, I want to learn more about JavaScript and Angular, and I want to learn more about the front end, about front-end technology. And unfortunately, the head of my department said that there wasn't really much else to learn right now because they hadn't gotten any curriculum for it. That was really interesting. And so he actually pushed me towards more online courses and more you know, online help. And that's where, like, if Microverse was there, man, that would have been awesome. Tools like Microverse are just, you guys have it so good these days, being able to learn. You know, I basically just learned from just Google, basically. I went to Google, I went to meetups, a lot of meetups. But something happened that really, really kind of jump-started my career. And it kind of all happened at once, but I went to a meetup. And one of my friends who I've known for a little bit, you know, we don't hang out a ton, but I would consider him kind of my first mentor. His name's Kent C. Dodds. You might have seen Kent online. He's everywhere in the JavaScript front-end community. But Kent got up and gave a talk, one of his first talks actually, about making new open source libraries for people to use. And at the time we were using Angular. And I don't know what it was, but it just kind of lit a fire inside of me, knowing that I could build a tool that did something really cool. I could publish that to the internet, and in this case, GitHub, and other people could download and use it, and make it better. Up until that point, I had only been a user of open source, as probably a lot of you are still at this point. You use open source because it's useful, it's free. But it wasn't until I started contributing and building new open source technology that I feel like my knowledge of open source and front end and everything really took off. After that, I started publishing a few modules for Angular. Some of them I can't even remember. I built a toggle one time. It's just the little switch that goes back and forth. I built a scroll, a scroll mechanism that would up to the screen. Little things like this. These are things I built for Angular. And while I was at one of these meetups for Angular, I met my now co-founders of Nozzle. They were there, and they were looking for a front-end developer to start Nozzle with them. And I really didn't know much at the time, but apparently I caught their eye because I was talking about the new libraries that I had built, and talking about these libraries, I guess they realized that I was a creator. They wanted me on their team. So after the meetup, they came and talked to me, and eventually we started Nozzle. I won't go into too much what Nozzle is, but Nozzle is a way for mid to larger companies to track where they rank in Google against their competitors and whatnot. But from that point on, really, open source took off for me. And I was learning something new every day. As they mentioned, at Nozzle, we needed to do some data visualization. And Chart.js, even as it was 4 years ago, was amazing. But it still needed some polish, and it had not gotten a lot of attention from its original creator, Nick. He did a fantastic job, but he'd kind of fallen off the radar. I wanted to build the second version of Chart.js, and I didn't know exactly how to do that. And another friend of mine, Everett Timberg, also wanted to build the next version. So we decided we were going to team up and ask Nick if he would let us build Chart.js 2.0. And he actually did. I was surprised that he did. He kind of stepped aside and kind of let me and Everett head up this new 2.0 version of Chart.js. And so, man, I remember we ripped it apart. We pulled down the GitHub repository and just made a new branch called it 2.0. And man, we just ripped. I don't want that. We said, "Oh, this is great." We kept a lot of the cool things that Nick had written, and eventually, over the course of about 3 or 4 months, we had written the new version of 2.0 that would scale a little bit better and have an easier experience for people to use plugins. Personally, I think I built the animation system, the animation API for Chart.js, which that was really difficult. Everything that I was doing in Chart.js was stretching my capabilities as a developer, because I honestly just didn't know much, but I was putting myself in a situation where I needed to learn it. And collaborating with Everett, it's really fun to collaborate over open source because you're not with each other, you may not know each other, but you feel like a team. So we launched Chart.js 2.0, and man, it just went wild. It got so popular. There's lots of stars, it was really cool to see something that I built get popular, and people submitted issues and made it even better than what we had ever hoped for. And it was really amazing. It taught me a lot about open source, and that's kind of when my name, I feel, started to kind of get out there a little bit. It was never really my intention. I just wanted to have a good job and be able to make enough to support my family. But by writing Chart.js, it kind of kickstarted me into this world of open source. And honestly, it is one of the most fun things that I've ever done. And after I did that, I just needed more. I was super hungry. I wanted more open source. It's very addictive, very addicting. So after that, I got into React soon after that and built a couple of libraries. I built a library called Jumpsuit, which is deprecated now, but at the time Redux was really new and hot, and Jumpsuit was a way to use Redux without all the boilerplate, which is a controversial topic, but at the time it was really cool. I don't use it anymore, but after that I quickly moved on to some other libraries. One of them I built was React Table. Not sure if you guys have ever heard of React Table, but we'll send the link there if you guys wanted to go look at it. React Table is it's a data grid component for React. It's really cool. After that, I wrote React Form. React Form is also a library that I don't use anymore, mostly because there's other form libraries that have gotten much better. And React Story, it was an animation. It's an animation library for React, but after writing React Move, I met someone else. His name is Steve. I'm just going to carry mentioned here. So I wrote React Move, and I felt really good about it. And then I saw this other library, and now I can't even remember what it was called, but Steve Hall, SG Hall, wrote it, and it was basically React Move, but better, you know. And this was kind of interesting. I didn't know whether I should feel like angry that it was, you know, oh, he like kind of stole my idea, or if, you know, I felt a little jealous because I feel like he had built what I wanted to build, but he built it better. I actually contacted Steve and I said, hey, your library is really good and it feels a lot like mine. Why don't we combine forces? So that's what we did. We merged the two projects together, and now it's actually got quite a good following on GitHub. It's a really fun tool to use. And then kind of like my last big library that I built is called React Static. And I think there's a couple of you here that actually use React Static. And maybe that's how a lot of people have heard of me, but React Static was a really fun project. It's a static site generator that is supposed to feel a lot like using Create React App, but gives you the performance and the progressively enhanced experience of something like Gatsby or a progressive web app. It's really cool. React Static was really difficult to build, mostly because it's a build system. And at the time, I had no idea how to do build systems. Webpack was over my head and still is to some extent. And yeah, Adrian just posted a link to it. Thanks, Adrian. Yeah, like React Static is still going strong, and it's really fun. But you know, at this point, I feel like I'm a serial library writer, and it's really fun. I try and limit it to some extent now, but I've written a couple other libraries. I have React Charts, which is one that I'm still working on. React Location, which is an alternative router for React. There's just a lot of them. And really, I guess what I want people to take away from, you know, my story is that 5 years ago, I didn't know anything about programming. I didn't know how to write a single program at all. And I was actually studying something completely different. I feel like once I got into programming, the thing that carried me through my learning process and, you know, all the jobs that I had and the freelance that I did, and eventually into the startup that I have, and also making me a better programmer from my startup, has all been open source. You know, it's a place where you can really express yourself freely with code and share it and make the world a better place. You know, I feel like anyone can really contribute to open source because there's something out there for everybody. If you have a passion, there's going to be something related to it in the open source world. And, you know, right now, the best thing to do is to use those open source projects get familiar with them, and hopefully contribute back to them. But really my challenge to you would be to start building your own. Building your own open source projects is an adventure into the unknown. You know, nobody knows, like, you don't know what's going to happen with that project. It could not mean anything at all. No one will use it. It could die, you know, but you'll have the learning experience there. And hopefully eventually you'll be able to give back to the community the same way that you took from them in the beginning. It's a circle of life, right? It's a circle of open source. So honestly, I would attribute a lot of my success to the people I've worked with in open source, to the people I've met through open source software, and the libraries I've been able to challenge myself with in open source have all been some of the biggest reasons that I've been able to grow into the position that I am now. And so, like, yeah, not to be like super mushy, but like I'm super grateful for open source and the people that took me under their wing when I was learning how to code. Yeah, I wanted to leave as much time as I could for questions. So if we want to get to that, I'm not too big of a fan of monologuing, but questions are the best.
Okay, Tanner, first of all, thank you so much for sharing your journey through open source and through JavaScript with us. So there is a few questions that we would like you to answer, and I'll start with the best one. So first one is from Wilfred Morgan. He says, I started learning programming 18 months ago. How can someone with limited experience start contributing to your open source project? What expertise do you need the most?
So a lot of open source projects have labels in their issues that are marked good first issue. And a lot of open source libraries have pull requests and features and bugs that are actually reserved for people who are learning how to contribute to open source. I will try and find a good asset to link to for that. But for basically any repo you want, you can open up the issues and find a bug that has probably been reserved for newcomers. And that's because people in open source, we want people to contribute more. So we're going to make it easy for you to do that. The expertise you're going to need the most, you know, being at least a little familiar with Git is going to be very valuable. But you can get pretty far by just using the GitHub app, in my opinion. So knowing, you know, enough knowledge about whatever library you're using and knowing how to use GitHub, like, you can be pretty productive with just those two things.
Okay, thank you, Tanner. So we have a few more questions. However, it seems you already answered a few. So we have one from Medin Mujkovic. He asks, what's the best way to start? Probably contributing to open source projects. And you already said, first start with Git and then continue on with the bugs and pull requests. So there's two questions regarding React. One is React Static, the other is React Table. Both of them are related to how long it took you to build them.
Okay, so what inspired me to build React Static? How long did it take me to build it? You know, Nozzle is not in the business of building tools like this, but at the time I was building the marketing site for Nozzle. It's nozzle.io, if you were wondering. And I really didn't like the experience of building the marketing site. It's not like an app where you know, you just load up dynamic JavaScript on load. It needs to be HTML. It needs to be generated so that Google can see it, so that it's really fast. And there were a couple of tools out there at the time. Next.js was one that was getting popular. Gatsby was also very popular. And I had tried both of those, and they had left me wanting more. And it seemed like, at the time, it didn't seem like it was going to be that involved to build my own. But I decided I was going to try it out anyway. So I started building React Static in 2017 in September. And then I launched it in November of that same year. So it took me about a month, maybe a month and a half to build. And then obviously we've been working on it for the last year, for all the new versions of it. So initially, though, it was about a month or two of work. Keep in mind, React Static is a large library, so or at least a complex library, so it took some time.
Okay, thank you. So here from our main host, Adrian. So how do you go about discovering a need or a problem that needs a solution that requires a software solution and actually start building it? Like, what's the process from discovery to programming?
Yeah, discovering the need for me. Like whenever I encounter something that feels like it shouldn't take as long as it should, or that feels harder than it should, after the first few minutes of experiencing this, I will immediately go to GitHub or NPM or Google, and I will search for other developers on this problem, right? This is the same thing that happened with React Table. I needed a table component for React, and a couple of open source projects, and they were okay, but they still didn't ease the pain for me enough. And so after I had researched enough and found almost all of the options that were available, I decided that there was a missing hole in the ecosystem. There's a place that is better. Most of the time, I'd prefer just to use an existing library. You don't need to write your own of everything. I want to use people's software, but sometimes there's room for improvement. So if it's impossible for me to contribute to one of those libraries, that's when I start to build my own. So really, it's when you feel the pain and you're unable to solve solutions that are out there.
That's a great answer, Tanner. So I have this question from Anton Bogdan Alexandrov. He is asking a really specific question, and it's, does your company have remote job opportunities?
So right now, our company is extremely small. There's only 8 of Nozzle. And right now, we don't have any remote developers at the time. We're actually growing very slowly. We're staying very lean. So at the time, we do not have any openings for remote developers or new developers. I should be having some openings for new, new developer interns for the front end, maybe in the next year. It will depend on how quickly we're able to scale and grow.
Okay, that's great. So another user, which we don't have a name for, he's asking, it's a general question, like, is it harder for developers from developing countries to get hired remotely? Do you have any knowledge on this?
Yeah, to some extent. There shouldn't be a gap there, but unfortunately there is. And really, the only thing that I can think of that's difficult with remote work is if you're in a position where you need to architect with people, nothing can replace being in a physical space. Having a whiteboard and being able to interface face to face. So remote jobs are getting easier to have and easier to collaborate on. I still personally think there is a lot of value in having people be physically present. But right now, that mostly reflects the state of my company, Nozzle, where there's a very few of us. We're very tight-knit. So clearly, we would want to have any team members we bring on be as close as we can to the team. But as a company grows, hopefully in a year or two, when Nozzle has 50 or 60 employees, having some of those employees be remote is not a big deal at all, and in fact, at that point, it's a lot easier to scale out into the remote world than it is to scale physically. So I'd say it's more about timing. And being in a developing country versus a country that is a little more established, like, I don't think that really has too much to do with it. The only thing that I would think that would get in the way would maybe be, any language. Clearly, if I applied to a company, out of Czechoslovakia, and I didn't, speak the language, that we might have some communication hurdles. And same thing working for any company, speaking the language that the company prefers is going to be a big plus. But other than that, if you can prove that you can do the work and that you're a valuable asset, I think you can get hired anywhere. You can get a job anywhere. So at least that's the way it should be, and that's what we should work towards.
Okay, just let me see if there are any more interesting questions. Well, there's an interesting question from Daniel Arhimi. So he's asking, how's the future for Ruby? As we're learning Ruby here at Microverse, I'm not sure what are your insights on it. Like, what do you think? Does it have a bright future?
Personally, I don't know a whole lot about Ruby, to be honest. I've never really had a desire to learn Ruby because I've never needed it. At least in my experience with full stack software, anytime I've needed something on the server, I can write Node.js to do that. And I've never had a problem doing that. There are projects that maybe need to scale a little bit more or are really intensive. We've been using a language called Golang, or just Go. So as far as Ruby, I'm not sure. I'm not the one to say what the future of Ruby looks like. All I can tell you is that the future of Node and the future of JavaScript is very bright. JavaScript is everywhere right now. So learning JavaScript will always, be a plus. It's always going to be a great tool to have in your tool belt.
Okay. So let's see. Another question from Lade James. It resembles one of you already answered, but let's go. I've heard countless times how much I need to contribute to open source to improve my skills, but sincerely, I still feel one needs to attain a level of self-development firstly, before one can start writing reasonable contribution to open source code. Please, Tanner, kindly correct my assumptions if they are wrong.
No, I will level with you and be honest that, if you're using a library like React or Ionic or something like that, being able to contribute to that library is going to be difficult if they're very well-known libraries, if they're very complex. And, even libraries that are fairly simple, you might not feel completely equipped to contribute to those libraries. And that's okay. To me, what that means is that maybe it's time to improve your core programming skills a little bit more, or to become familiar with the library. For me, when I wanted to get into open source, I found it was easier to build my own library, even if I knew no one was going to use it. I just wanted to build it just to say that I had, or maybe it's a tool that I want to use in my other projects. Building something on your own, that way you're working at your own level. You're able to write code at the level that you'll understand it, and you'll run into situations where you'll need to expand your knowledge on your own. And hopefully you are driven enough to get onto Google and figure out how to do that. Yeah, contributing to existing libraries, there might be a bar you have to meet, but if you're feeling that a lot, lower the bar, build your own library, work on something more simple. There's always something out there.
Okay, great. So I would only like to add to your answer, since like in our curriculum we have this a huge bias towards contributing to open source as much as possible, and the first step after, of course, learning how to use Git is to start with the documentation. It says like that the most projects, they lack in documentation, and like since we are not that deep into code, we can go through the code, find some missing descriptions of features, figure them out, and just contribute to the docs. However, there's a really interesting one from Wilfred Morgan. What are your thoughts on using Golang? When is it appropriate to use it?
Well, personally, I don't use Golang a whole lot, but my backend team does. We switched to Golang because we needed extreme parallelism. We needed to be doing a lot of things at once, and we need to be able to scale those processes to a really large amount. We crawl the web basically every day, all day, and we have about 500 terabytes of data coming into our system maybe every few months. So it's a lot of data, and the only system we found that was able to work well with that was Go. So I can answer that if you have really intense server processes, Go is probably going to be a safe bet. Other than that, I'm probably not the best person to ask that question to, but I know enough that that's going to be a good indicator of when you need to use Go. For everything that I do personally, Node has been fine.
Okay, Tanner, thank you. Well, it seems maybe just one more question. Stacy Nash, she's asking, is it possible to contribute to apps that are out of date? Apparently, she has an app that is no longer functional on her computer.
Yeah, you know, it kind of reminds me of what happened with Chart.js, right? I wanted to use Chart.js, and to some extent, it was outdated, and it needed upgrades. The only thing that I was able to do was to contact the original developer and ask if there was anything that I could do. So that would be a great start. You know, if an app is outdated and you want to keep using it or take it over or help contribute fixes to it, then contact the original developer. I'm sure that they would love your help.
Okay. So we have a question. It's about a really low-level language compared to JavaScript. So what are the benefits of JavaScript compared to more traditional languages like C++? And I think we're talking like completely different categories here.
Yeah, wow. That's a very broad-reaching question. They're so different. You know, at the very basic level, C++ is so much more of a lower-level language than JavaScript. You're working closer to the processor. It's a compiled language. You know, you have to manage your own memory, which is very difficult to do. You don't have access to the same type of immediate productivity that you do with JavaScript. That's a really hard question. They're just so different. I feel like the pros of working with JavaScript is that you can work with JavaScript knowing very little about programming. It's a very simple language to understand. There's a lot of things that are automatic and a lot of things that are magical and flexible. You can get really far knowing not too much. But C++ is a very involved, very advanced language, very performant, very fast if you know how to write it. I personally don't. I prefer to be productive with what I know, so I write in JavaScript. So.
All right. Thank you very much, Tanner. That's all the time that we have today. Thanks again so much to our speaker, Tanner from Nozzle. We hope that you all join us in our next Lunch and Learn, which will be announced in the future. That's all for now, and have a great day, guys.